She's not a guest. If she stays here for another minute, call security." The words rang out right behind me, in the middle of a ballroom blazing with crystal chandeliers. I stopped short, still holding the invitation envelope I hadn't even opened yet. No one turned to look at me. They were silent just long enough for me to understand that the person being talked about was me. I stood still, not because I was afraid, but because I was counting how far they were willing to go. But that night, in a luxurious country club where I had been invited, I realized something. There are families that will never allow you to leave with dignity. If you've ever been treated like a scratch on a perfect family portrait, you might understand why I stood there for a few extra seconds, asking myself whether I should take another step forward or turn my back. Before I continue this story, let me ask you something very simple. Where are you listening to this right now? In the living room, in the car, or alone in the kitchen after everyone else has gone to sleep? If this story touches you in any way, leave a comment, press like, and stay until the end. Some stories don't need advice, they just need to be heard all the way through. That night's event was a medical fundraising gala held at the oldest country club in town, a place regularly frequented by familiar, well-known families. I arrived alone, a dark dress, nothing elaborate. I wasn't trying to draw attention. My name was printed clearly on the invitation envelope, embossed lettering, thick paper, still smelling of fresh ink. But when the woman behind the reception desk scanned the list, her finger paused longer than necessary. She looked up at me, then back at the screen. No apology, just an awkward silence. I heard glasses clinking behind me, steady laughter, as if nothing unusual were happening. A very familiar gesture appeared from a distance. My mother. She didn't come closer, she simply tilted her head and gave a brief signal to the event staff, the kind of signal I had seen hundreds of times growing up, just enough for things to be handled, quietly, without noise or trouble. The receptionist smiled more politely than needed and spoke in a low voice, saying I could wait temporarily in a side area near the hallway leading to the back. She spoke quickly, as if afraid someone might overhear. I followed the direction she pointed, a narrow corridor, pale yellow lighting, and at the end a sign pointing to the restrooms. I asked softly, almost whispering, "The side area is where, near the restrooms?" She hesitated. A few people nearby turned to look, just for a second. Then everything moved on again. I could have left right then, quietly, easily, but I chose to stay, not to prove anything. I simply stood there, leaning lightly against the cold stone counter, watching familiar faces pass by me, as if I were an extra detail in a scene that had already been carefully arranged. And then, as I waited, my eyes drifted to the large information board hanging in the center of the hall. The list of the evening's principal benefactors was printed prominently at the top. One name made my hand tighten slightly, a strange, sharp feeling rising up. It was the man who had once gripped my hand years ago in an old hospital room and called me his lifesaver when he had no one else left to trust. My mother was the one who stepped forward. She didn't walk fast, nor did she rush. The way she moved through the hall was so familiar I could almost predict each step. When she was close enough, she stopped, keeping a carefully measured distance. Not far enough to seem cold, not close enough to appear affectionate. Her voice dropped, smooth and composed, as if speaking to a stranger who needed to be handled quietly. "You should step outside for a bit," she said. "It's crowded in here, it's not appropriate." Before I could answer, Chloe appeared beside her. My sister wore an ivory dress, elegant in cut, her smile practiced so thoroughly that not a single crack of emotion showed through. Her eyes swept over me quickly, like someone checking a potentially dangerous object. Not the look of a younger sister seeing her older sister after a long time. It was the look of someone assessing risks. "You came without telling anyone," Chloe said, her voice low but clear enough for my mother to hear. "Today is important." Important, I had heard that word for years at family dinners where I usually sat last. When everyone was nearly finished eating, my mother would set my bowl down and say it was more convenient. Not because there were no chairs, not because I was late, just a habit. A habit so old that no one found it strange anymore. I looked around the ballroom, familiar faces from this town, people who used to ask after my family every holiday. No one looked at me directly. They chatted, laughed, raised their glasses. No one seemed bothered by my presence. Only my family was tense. My mother exhaled softly, as if weighing her words carefully. "You should be grateful we're not making a scene," she said. "I'm helping you save face." I looked at her closely. Her hand was gripping a leather clutch, nails painted a pale shade. No shaking, no anger, just a familiar practiced control. "I'm just standing here," I said. My voice wasn't loud, just a sentence resting quietly between us. Chloe frowned slightly. She glanced toward the information board in the center of the hall, then back at me, so quickly it seemed almost unnoticeable. I saw it clearly. A very brief moment, but enough to understand. They weren't afraid I would cause a scene. They were afraid I was no longer where they were used to placing me. Around us, the music continued evenly. A server passed by with a tray of drinks. The atmosphere remained elegant, smooth. There was no confrontation, no harsh words. Just a slight misalignment, small but enough to make them uneasy. If I was only standing there, why did they need me to disappear? A faint ripple of murmurs spread through the hall as the main doors opened. Not loud enough to draw attention, just the familiar sound that follows when an important figure enters the room. I saw a few people turn their heads, then more near the information board. Handshakes began faster, smiles were adjusted into place. Samuel Carter entered, flanked by two members of the organizing committee. He wore a dark gray suit, lean but upright, silver hair neatly combed. I didn't need a name tag to recognize him. Some faces, no matter how many years pass, remain fixed in memory. He scanned the room as if looking for someone. When his gaze met mine, he stopped. No hesitation, no pause. He walked straight toward me, down the aisle where I stood beside the cold stone counter. In that moment, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. Samuel walked directly toward me, the person who minutes earlier had been treated like a scratch that needed to be erased. Do you want to know what Samuel said that made my entire family go pale? Comment continue, and I'll tell you exactly how the moment turned in the next part. "Lena Morris," he said, his voice low and clear. "It's been a long time." He extended his hand. I took it on instinct. The handshake was firm, warm, nothing overly formal. He turned to the people beside him and introduced me naturally, as if it were the most obvious thing in the room. He said my name correctly, used the right form of address, placed me exactly where I had once belonged years ago, in a chapter of my life my family had never known about. No one understood what was happening. I could see it clearly on the faces around us. My mother froze, her grip tightening on her clutch. Chloe tilted her head slightly, the smile on her lips stiffening for a split second before being forced back into place, crooked. Samuel looked around the hall as if checking for something missing. He frowned lightly, then asked, his voice not loud, but clear enough to carry in the sudden quiet, "Isn't she seated at the honor table?" The question dropped into the room like something small but heavy. No one answered immediately. The organizers looked at one another. One man bent to check the list. A woman stepped forward half a step, then stopped. Chloe turned to my mother and whispered something quickly. I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Her eyes flicked toward me and away again, as if calculating something more urgent than her carefully maintained composure. I stayed still. I didn't explain. I didn't step in. I knew that if I spoke now, everything would shift. But I didn't. I let the silence remain, forcing others to fill it in their own way. Samuel adjusted his cuff, glanced at his watch, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps we should begin earlier," he said, turning toward the small stage at the front of the hall. "I'll speak now." The organizers startled. A few nodded hurriedly. The background music was lowered. A microphone was brought up. In that moment, I felt it clearly. From this point on, nothing would be fully under my family's control anymore. There are moments when a crowded room holds its breath. The music had stopped completely. Even footsteps were kept soft enough not to draw attention. And in that moment, just one sentence could make it impossible for things to return to how they were. Samuel stood at the microphone, one hand resting lightly on the cold metal. He didn't open with a long greeting, nor did he mention numbers or fundraising plans as usual. He simply looked around slowly, as if weighing every face in front of him. "I'm here tonight," he said, his voice deep and steady, "not only for this fund, but because of one person." A few heads lifted. I felt eyes beginning to gather, quiet but heavy. "Many years ago," Samuel continued, "when I had nothing left but a hospital room and bills I didn't know how to pay, there was a young person who helped me stand back up. Not with money, with time, with responsibility, and with silence at the right moment." He paused just long enough for the room to lean toward him. Samuel's gaze found me. Not rushed, not performative, just direct and clear. And then, like a chain reaction, other eyes followed. I heard a soft intake of breath to my right. My mother. Chloe stood beside her, posture too rigid, hands clasped together. Her smile was gone. Samuel repeated my name once more into the compressed silence. He didn't give details. He didn't mention dates. He simply said it correctly, in the tone people use when they know exactly who they are talking about. I stepped back half a step, not to hide, just to avoid standing at the center. A very small movement, but enough for me to feel the cold stone floor under my heels. A micro hesitation, as if my body itself was asking whether I should move forward or not. I didn't want to take the stage. I didn't want the story to tilt in another direction just because of me. I kept my hands at my sides, fingers brushing the edge of my dress so they wouldn't shake. Samuel added a few brief lines about why he believed in this fund, about the importance of those who work behind the lights. He didn't look back at me again. He didn't need to. What needed to be planted had already been planted. I saw it clearly on my family's faces. Not anger, not embarrassment, but a newly opened gap where old definitions were starting to loosen. They were beginning to understand that I was not who they had always placed at the edge of the frame. Samuel adjusted the microphone and leaned slightly toward the organizers. "We'll begin the speeches earlier than planned," he said. "I think this is the right moment." In that moment, I knew the seed was already in the ground. And from here on out, whether I spoke or not, it would find its own way to grow. Samuel stepped back from the microphone and angled it toward me with a very small movement. No signal, no invitation. I shook my head. The gesture happened so quickly, only those nearby noticed. He nodded lightly, as if he had expected it, and turned back to the stage. "Please allow me to continue," he said calmly, "and I want to clarify one thing." The organizers stood close behind him. One held a folder, another adjusted the lights. The air in the hall grew heavy, as if someone had quietly removed oxygen from the room. "The largest donation tonight," Samuel said, "does not come from the host family, nor is it tied to any promotional campaign." He paused just long enough for everyone to hold their breath. "It is made in the name of an individual, someone who has chosen to stay behind the lights for many years." He read my name clearly without stumbling. My full name, pronounced the way someone does when they're not reading it off a page. The screen behind the stage lit up. The number appeared clean and unembellished. A few murmurs escaped, then died away. I stood still, my arms close to my body. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't smile. I let everything unfold as it was meant to. My mother remained motionless. Chloe was different. She leaned toward me just close enough that no one else could hear. Her voice had gone hoarse. "Did you do this to get back at me?" There was no anger in the question, only fear. A very familiar kind of fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes they've been standing in the wrong place for far too long. No, I said. Just one word, then a pause. I did it because I have the right. She stepped back quickly, as if the words had touched something hot. I saw Mark standing behind her, his gaze no longer fixed on the stage. He looked at Chloe, then at the information board, then back at Chloe again. He said nothing. But the space between them had opened, just wide enough for a question to slip through. By this point, all the truth about the forged signatures had been laid bare. If you were in my position, would you choose to say everything in front of the guests to reclaim justice or walk away in silence to preserve the last shred of dignity for your mother? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on this choice. Samuel continued, his voice steady, free of personal emotion. He spoke about long-term commitment, about transparency, about how this fund needs people willing to take responsibility without needing their names on the front page. He did not mention my family again. A round of applause broke out, starting from somewhere near the back of the hall, then spreading. I didn't join in. I looked down at the floor where the lights reflected in broken patches. In a very brief moment, an old image flashed through. A long-ago dinner where I waited until everyone was finished before I was allowed to clear my own bowl. That feeling didn't come back. All that remained was a space that had already been filled with something else. Mark leaned down to say something to Chloe. She shook her head over and over. A staff member from the organizing committee came over, whispered, and handed them a sheet of paper. I didn't need to hear to know the rhythm was accelerating. The peak had begun. And this time I didn't need to fight for anything. I just stood in the right place and let everything turn on its own. The air in the hall changed quickly after the applause. The organizers started moving more. A man in a dark blue suit stepped onto the stage, whispered to Samuel, holding a thin stack of documents. Samuel listened, nodded, then leaned in to exchange a few more words. His expression sharpened, the earlier social ease gone. At the head table, Chloe half stood and then sat back down. She tugged at the hem of her dress, took a deep breath, but her breathing stayed uneven. Mark looked at her, for the first time all night, without hiding his scrutiny. Samuel returned to the microphone. "May I have one more minute?" he said. "There's a technical detail that needs to be clarified." A side screen lit up next to the stage. Not a slideshow, just a simple data table, numbers arranged in columns. The man in the blue suit pointed at one line and said something low enough that only those nearby could hear. Samuel skimmed it, then looked up. "In the fundraising file," he said slowly, "there is a contribution recorded under the name of the host family's representative. However, the source and the person responsible for signing the confirmation do not match." A whisper spread, unclear where it began. Chloe shook her head immediately, like a reflex. "That can't be," she said, a little too loudly. "There's been some mistake." Mark put a hand on her wrist, holding her in place. "Explain it," he said, low but firm, in front of everyone. Chloe turned to him, lips moving. "I told you already," she said quickly. "Everything is valid." The man in the blue suit stepped down and walked straight to Chloe, holding out his hand. "Excuse me," he said. Chloe hesitated for a second, then handed over the folder she was holding. Her fingers trembled slightly. When he flipped the first page, a stack of papers slid out of the stiff cover and fell onto the stone floor with a dry, blunt sound. The entire hall went silent. Chloe bent to pick them up, too fast. One page flipped face up. My name was clearly visible on the original confirmation signature line, and beneath it was a note that had been altered. No need to read it all. Seeing it was enough. "You told me this was your work," Mark said, not an accusation, a confirmation. "You told me you handled it from the beginning." Chloe looked up, eyes glassy and red. She stopped, swallowed. "I just made things look better." Samuel stepped down one stair, no longer behind the microphone. "You used someone else's file," he said, and credited it under your own name." Chloe shook her head again and again. "It's not like that." Her voice rose, cracking. I only helped organize it. I thought no one would notice. I stood a few steps away. I didn't move forward. I didn't step back. I watched it the way you watch a crack opening slowly in a surface that's been polished too carefully. A memory flashed quick. The times I finished the work and was told to stay quiet because we don't need trouble. Mark let go of Chloe's hand. The space between them opened clearly. He turned to Samuel, then looked at the data table again. "We need to stop," he said. Chloe stood frozen, arms hanging at her sides. The remaining pages slid down after the first stack scattered at her feet. I didn't bend down to help. I didn't turn away either. The truth had found its own way into the light, and this time I didn't have to touch it. Some truths, if hidden long enough, start to seem harmless. But when the light switches on, the closest person burns first. Mark stood facing Chloe. No one stepped in. No one helped her speak. He didn't raise his voice, and he didn't have to. Just one short question dropped straight into the space that had opened between them. "You said this was yours, so whose signature is that?" Chloe opened her mouth, then closed it. Her lips trembled, unable to hold rhythm. She turned to my mother, as if reaching for a familiar lifeline. My mother stepped forward half a step. Her voice rushed, strangely gentle. "Maybe there has been a misunderstanding. She was only following instructions. This whole thing," her eyes flicked to me, "started because someone didn't make things clear." The words slid out smoothly, the way they always had. An old habit, shifting responsibility onto me so everything had somewhere to land. Samuel didn't step in. He stood back and let the room handle it. Mark turned to my mother, his gaze colder than before. "Are you talking about her?" He pointed at me briefly. "She didn't sign this file tonight." Chloe broke into tears. She couldn't hold the image anymore. "I just wanted everything to go well," she said, her voice splitting. "Everyone wanted me to be able to do it. I didn't think—" "You thought," Mark cut in, not loud, but final. "You thought no one would notice." The whispers spread fast. Not noisy, but thick. I heard my name in a few corners. Some people looked at me like it was the first time. Some avoided my eyes, as if afraid of touching something inconvenient. My mother turned fully toward me. "Can you say one sentence?" she asked, urgent. "Just say you agree." I lifted my hand very lightly. A gesture just enough to stop her. The room paused with it. In that moment, I saw my hands clearly. They weren't shaking. A memory returned quickly. An old night, me standing at the sink, shaking so badly I dropped a porcelain bowl. Back then, someone told me not to make a big deal out of it. This time was different. "I'm not taking responsibility for something I didn't do," I said. Just one sentence. Nothing more. No explanation. No one objected or demanded I continue. Mark gave a small nod as if confirming something already clear. Samuel signaled the organizers to pause the program. Someone guided Chloe away from the center. She walked unsteadily, without looking back. I turned. No one stopped me. The exit was already there, the hallway light softer than the main hall. Each step carried me farther from the whispers, away from the eyes that had just shifted direction. The door closed behind me without a loud sound. I stood still for one beat, then kept walking. The first message came as I stepped into the parking lot. The screen lit in my hand buzzed softly, then went dark. I didn't open it. The night wind moved through the trees around the country club, carrying the scent of damp grass and the familiar insects of the suburbs. I opened my car door, sat down, closed it, and let silence return to where it belonged. In the days that followed, everything moved faster than I expected. The event was postponed with a short notice, no explanation. The fund temporarily stopped accepting donations and opened an internal review following standard procedure. A general email went out, neutral in tone, emphasizing transparency and accountability. Mark stepped back from his role as the family's legal representative. No noise, no statement. just a new empty space appearing exactly where something had once been considered certain. My phone kept buzzing, missed calls from familiar numbers, short messages, then longer ones, sometimes pleading, sometimes clumsy explanations. I didn't block them. I didn't reply either. I let the words sit in my inbox like loose papers that didn't yet have a place to be filed. One afternoon, I parked in front of the old house, only to retrieve a few things I'd left behind. I didn't go inside. I stood on the porch, opened my bag, and touched the thin silver bracelet I'd worn for years. A gift from my mother, from back when things hadn't been so sharply divided. I took it off, slipped it into my pocket, and zipped it closed. A small motion, but enough to make my hand feel lighter. A memory flickered quick. An early morning, me sitting at the kitchen table, turning the bracelet on my wrist, listening to a spoon tap a glass. Back then, the bracelet felt like a vague promise. Now, it was just cold metal. I put it away. That night, I drove home. Street lights came on in segments, steady. I opened my door, turned on the kitchen light, set my bag on a chair. Nothing here required me to explain or prove myself. The kettle came to a boil, that familiar hiss. I poured water, leaned against the counter, and watched the steam fade. Out there, consequences kept moving along their own orbit. I didn't need to stay and watch. I had left the place where every look demanded I stand still, and this time the road home was clear enough for me to keep going, without rushing, without turning back. What happened after that reached me quietly, not through direct retelling, but through short items that slid across a screen, conversations lowered when I walked into my usual coffee shop. Chloe disappeared from community honor boards. Old posts were taken down. Her name stopped appearing in weekend fundraiser updates. That silence weighed more than any criticism. My family, too. Greetings that used to be warm became hesitant. Some people turned away before they met my eyes. Some asked after me briefly and ended the conversation too quickly. This town is small. Its collective memory is durable. When a story turns, it doesn't need anyone to guide it. I went to work as usual. Early mornings, unlocking my office, turning on the lights, setting my bag down, a rushed sandwich at noon, meetings in the afternoon, signing papers, answering emails. Everything moved at the same pace. There was no sense of victory, no rising wave of grief, just a flat surface after the wind has passed. One evening, I parked in the lot by the small park near my place. Kids ran around, laughter breaking and dissolving. I sat in my car, looking through the windshield, letting an old memory drift by. I used to want to be called by name in family gatherings. Wanted a nod. Wanted a good job. Wanted it so badly, I adjusted myself to fit the frame someone else had drawn. The feeling of regret came briefly, then settled. Not painful, not lingering, like touching a scar that's already healed. You know it's there, but it doesn't ache anymore. The price I paid became clearer when the messages thinned out and then stopped completely. No more roundabout explanations, no more asking. A blank space opened wide enough for me to understand the old door had closed, not out of anger, but because there was no longer any shared place to stand. I don't regret it. I also don't comfort myself with big statements. I only know this. Justice isn't free. It takes away things that used to be called family and gives something else back, the ability to stand upright without anyone's permission. That night, I got home later than usual, turned off the living room light, pulled the curtains, set my keys on the shelf. In the quiet kitchen, I poured water, took a sip, and set the glass down. A very small sound, but enough to tell me I was exactly where I belonged. My life after that wasn't dramatic, no celebration, no huge doors swinging open all at once. Every morning I still woke up early, made coffee, opened the window to let light into my small kitchen. Work continued at a familiar rhythm. Friends called when they needed to and stayed quiet when they didn't. Everything was slower, calmer, but steady on ground that was mine. I didn't win completely. Some afternoons when I drove past the old road, memories still visited like a headwind. I lost a piece of the past. Dinners spent waiting for a nod, calls hoping to be answered. That loss didn't disappear just because I kept walking. It stayed there, like a box on a high shelf. Not opened every day, but known to exist. In return, I got back the right to define myself. No permission needed to stand straight. No need to adjust my voice to fit someone else's ears. I learned to choose where I stay, where respect isn't a reward but the minimum requirement. That right came slowly, and it cost me, but it was real. I don't conclude who was right and who was wrong. What happened is clear enough for each person to see their part. I also don't need to close the story with a verdict. Some endings don't need an exclamation point. They just need to be set down in the right place. If there's one gift I can offer you, it's this. Don't stay where you have to ask permission to be respected. Not because you're weak, but because you deserve more than that. Leaving isn't always losing. Sometimes it's the only way to keep yourself. The story you just heard is fictional, inspired by real-life situations and very human experiences. The content was assisted by AI and edited by humans with the hope of offering a perspective for reflection and emotional value for viewers. This story does not encourage anyone to follow any specific actions. Each person has their own circumstances and choices. For me, what's left in the end is calm, when you know where you stand and why. Before we close, let me ask you one small question. Where are you right now as you're hearing this? In the living room, in the car, or alone in the kitchen after the house has gone quiet? If this story touched you, leave a line to share. A like, a comment, or a subscription is how you help stories like this keep being told. Thank you for staying until the last minute. If you have time, I invite you to watch more videos on the channel. Maybe there you'll find a piece that fits you perfectly.